It's really good to see all of you on the day before Mercury goes direct. And I don't know if you've been affected by Mercury retrograde as much as I have, but this has been really a horrible one. So looking forward to things going smoother. One of the most important lessons that I've learned over the second half of my life is that if you don't listen to spirit, spirit hits you over the head with a 2x4. So this talk is about the last time that happened to me and what I did about it. You know, some of you know I have two careers. I make a living as a forensic document examiner, which means that if somebody forges your name or you get an anonymous letter in the mail or things like that, you come to somebody like me and we figure out, if we can, who forged or whether it's a forgery or not. Handwriting authentication. And then the other part of my handwriting practice is that I analyze handwriting for personality traits. And I've been qualified in court to do both. However, having what I always like to say is, after analyzing handwriting for more than 40 years, I was ready to kill someone. And so I started writing mysteries because I didn't want to get caught and go to jail. So I also write fiction and nonfiction. I've published 11 mystery novels and seven nonfiction books. Well, the last time I spoke to this group was when my last book came out in October, and it's called The Last Door, which it's part of my paranormal mystery fiction series. And at that time, I believe I spoke about the messages that I'd been getting over several years through different mediums that I needed to write a different kind of book, a more personal book. Well, I didn't want to write a different kind of book. I had been writing a series about a forensic handwriting expert named Claudia Rose. She's not me, but she does the same kind of work that I do, and she gets into a lot more trouble than I do. And I wanted to continue doing that. But I thought, well, okay, maybe I could compromise. And so I decided several years ago to start writing a paranormal mystery series called the Beyond the Veil series. And I figured I could write about what I had learned from the death of my daughter in 2000. And, you know, everything that I'd learned about spirit, I could use in a mystery fiction book. And I would make it from the point of view of a young woman who is a reluctant medium. However, that did not satisfy spirit. And I kept hearing the same message from different mediums. You need to write a different kind of book. And at that point, the mediums started using a scary word. And I'm at this point going to try and share my screen with you. I'm looking over to the side because I have two screens. I used to have three, but one of them died. Now I need to share screen, hopefully. So the scary word that the medium started using was autobiographical. I did not want to write an autobiography because I thought, who would care about reading about my life? You know, it certainly had its moments like everybody's life, but enough to fill a book. And I just didn't want to be that exposed, frankly. But at the end of 2022, around last December, I started really thinking about it. And, you know, there have been times in my life that I didn't listen to spirit to my detriment. And so I thought, well, maybe my obstinacy, not listening, was causing a logjam and preventing me from succeeding in certain areas of my life that I wanted to succeed in. The original reason why I didn't want to write about my daughter's murder, besides it being painful, was it had such a sad ending. And who wants to read a book with a sad ending? But last December, I thought about it and I said, okay, I've got to write this book, but I could write it as the journey that I experienced from a strict religious cult that I grew up in that doesn't believe in the afterlife and that believes anything spirit related is demonic. So this would be my story from that cult through to spiritual freedom, religious freedom, in fact. So in December, I decided that. And in January, I started to write notes. I wrote about some of the experiences I had in my life that I wanted to talk about. And then I got a little bit more organized, and I made a list of topics and scenes to cover. And I put them on index cards. Each chapter or each scene had its own index card. Now, some authors will sit down and just start writing and they fly by the seat of their pants. I am not one of those authors. I need to write with an outline because I want to know where I'm going. The outline may change and it's flexible, but I like to at least know. That's why I have a PowerPoint here. I like to be a little bit organized. So each of the index cards started with a one-liner that described the topic, and then later I went back and enlarged the one line into a paragraph. And finally, when I was ready to write the book, to get started on it, each of those paragraphs introduced a chapter, and then I enlarged from there. Now, when I started writing fiction, I already had 2 nonfiction books published about handwriting. But what I discovered, because I wanted to do some research, I don't want to just start writing about my life. I needed to know, how are biographies written, autobiographies? And what I learned was there are 2 genres that are related but different. Autobiography and memoir are both a story of someone's life that are written by that person, and both are nonfiction narrative stories. But autobiography is a story of your life from beginning to, well, probably not end, but the point that you're writing it to. And a memoir is about a specific period in your life or a series of things in a particular theme. And I thought, oh, okay, a memoir, that makes it easier, or so I thought. And I read several books on memoir writing just to see to make sure I was going to do it right. Writing nonfiction is pretty easy because you don't have to make stuff up. The stuff that you're writing about already exists, but it's important that you know how to write. You got to write well in order to get your points across. So my first 2 books were technical nonfiction, and I'd written many articles and monographs. But when I wrote The Complete Idiot's Guide to Handwriting Analysis, with my first book, it had a conversational style because that's what the Idiot's Guide series required. So I knew a little bit about that. But this book, in case any of you are considering writing a memoir, I highly recommend this book, Fast Draft Your Memoir, Write Your Life Story in 45 Hours. You don't have to do it that fast. But this book has some really good points about how to make your life story interesting. And I actually changed what I had planned for the beginning of my book after reading this. I thought I would start with my daughter's birth. I'd been so sure that she was going to be a boy that all my kids were born at home. And when she was born, she was my first child. The doctor said, well, honey, your boy is a girl. And that was a shock. But I thought, oh yeah, I'll start the story there. But what I learned from this book on writing memoir was that you really need to engage your audience first, get them to root for you. They need to get to know something about you. And I decided, and maybe Spirit was telling me, because I asked for help, I needed to start this story with the death of my daughter, not with her birth. Having written nonfiction, when I started to write fiction, I found that it was literally a whole different story because the elements of fiction are many. And I had to learn new things like how to build a plot. You have to follow certain genre conventions, like depending on whether you're writing mystery or romance or sci-fi or urban fantasy or chick lit or any other fiction. They all have their own conventions, and you have to learn what they are for what you're writing. You have to learn how to plot. Like I use the 3-act structure where the beginning, and then you have a plot point in the middle of the first act, and then there's a plot point at the beginning of the second act, and that's each one has takes up its own amount of time. The first act is shorter, the third act is shorter, most of the action takes place in the second act. So all of those kinds of things, how to write about character, the rules of dialogue, because the way we speak to each other is not exactly the same as we speak on the page. So you need to learn about that. How to use exposition without becoming too talky or letting author me intrude into the story. Like I do a lot of research, and most authors do. And if I just took all that research that fascinated me, I loved it, and I dumped it onto the story, it would be super boring for the reader. So you have to learn how to use those things without authorial intrusion. You have to develop your voice, which means what makes your style different from other people's. You know what your voice is. Will the story be told in present tense or past tense? A lot of authors these days are writing in present tense, which really irritates me because it's hard to do skillfully. And for it to be successful, it needs to be really skillful. In my book, I actually started it in present tense, but after the section about my daughter, it goes into past tense. And then there's the point of view. Point of view is basically the eyes through which the reader sees. Is the story going to be told from first person, from yourself, or from second person, which is talking? That's kind of unusual, but it's addressing the reader directly and making them part of the story. Or is it going to be told by third person, in third person by a narrator? And if it's third person, is it omniscient, where the reader knows what's going on in the heads of all of the characters? Or is it limited, where you only have access to one character's interior? I once heard a famous author at a conference saying, there are 3 rules of writing, but nobody knows what they are. But there are certainly a lot of basic things that you need to know if you're going to write a book. Well, this is what I did in January. Thought about all these things because that book that I read talked about making a memoir, writing it like a fiction book. It's not fiction, but using all of these elements of fiction to make it an interesting story. The way you write the dialogue, the way you describe the characters, and all of these items are very important. So at the end of January, February 1st, in fact, I was ready to start writing. Now, I have never been a fast writer. In the past, it's taken me 9 months to a year to write a book, mainly because I don't write every day. I have that other career that pays the bills, but I'm not a very disciplined writer. So if you don't think I had Spirit's help, I was completely stunned to find myself writing the end on February 27th. I had written 71 short chapters in 258 pages. So when I say short chapters, most of them are vignettes, little, certain descriptive scenes. I think one of the most difficult things, well, the whole thing is difficult because you kind of make yourself naked in front of all your friends, and all of the things, well, not all, you have to pick and choose what things you're going to use, what's going to be interesting, what needs to be left out. But one of the difficult parts was what to include about my first husband, who is the father of my 3 children. And I had an abusive marriage in many ways, sometimes physical, but mostly psychological and emotional. But I have 2 sons who love their father, and their father and I don't hate each other anymore like we used to. We are cordial now. We live in different states. Maybe that's why. But I didn't want to write anything hurtful, but I needed to write the truth. So I had to be very careful about what I wrote in order to give it the proper flavor. Okay, so I started writing the book. I finished writing the book. I spent all of March editing it and adding things. And then at the beginning of April, I published it. One of in the beginning of the book, I decided to include a poem that I wrote for the minister to read on the day of Jennifer's funeral. I wrote it on the morning of the funeral, and I'm going to share it with you now. And then the first page and a half, which is the first chapter. So hopefully you will indulge me on that, the poem. For Jennifer. She was a woman of fiery power who chose her own path, hers, no one else's. Her strength eclipsed 1,000 trials under pressure that molds diamonds. The curves in the road were always hairpin turns for her. The dips, always deep potholes, never a molehill, always Everest. Still, she pressed on. She cried and raged and burned. She bent in two, but never broke. No wispy pinks or baby blues for her. Queenly purple, sizzling red, Stygian black. She was a woman of exotic beauty who never knew how beautiful she was. She was a woman well loved who never knew how well loved she was. February 19th, 2000, 11:30 a.m. When you pick up the ringing phone, you don't expect that a careless verbal match is about to be lit and set your world ablaze. It's Saturday morning and I'm dashing around the house, a whirlwind of activity preparing for a forensics conference in Reno. I have to figure out what I need to pack for the 3-day trip, make arrangements for a ride from the airport to the hotel, talk to the friend I'll be rooming with, make sure my husband and adult son have enough food while I'm away. Not because they're helpless, but because we take care of each other that way. Oh, and the cats. Must remember the cat food for Fritz and Sugar. In the midst of all the crazy, my cell phone rings, a number I don't recognize. This is 2000, and only close friends and family have that number. Thinking it's probably a misdial, I follow the ringtone and dig the phone out from under a stack of papers on my desk. I answer, hiding my impatience. Hello? The voice I hear is male, unfamiliar, and expressionless. Is Kenneth Lowe there? He asked. In my surprise at his request, I miss who he says he is. Why are you calling my ex-husband on my cell phone? I asked, confused. We've been divorced 20 years. Instead of answering, he moves right to his next question. Do you know Jennifer Lowe? My stomach tightens. 2 months ago, my daughter was placed in a mental health facility on a 5150 hold. That's the legal term for the involuntary commitment of an adult who is in a mental health crisis. Jen had freaked out over some boudoir photos she'd had taken by a friend of a friend. Afraid that he would post them online when he refused to give her the negatives, she'd had a meltdown. Things went from bad to worse, and her boyfriend, Tom Schnabel, called 911. Tom carried the weight and credibility of working as a special agent for the federal government, so the doctors listened when he said Jen was suicidal and should be locked up. She phoned from the hospital. It's not true, she swore. Tom is the crazy one, not me. Get me out of here, please. Jen was 27, which left me powerless to do more than listen to her anguish and fury at being locked up and to tell her that I loved her. After the initial 72-hour evaluation period, the doctors refused to release her unless she would admit that she wanted to kill herself. After a week-long standoff, they gave up and let her go. Now, a stranger is calling me about her. What has she gotten herself into this time? With an inward sigh, I mentally check off a few possibilities. Jailed for shoplifting? It's been 10 years since the last time. Picked a fight at a party in Mexico? A car accident with her friend, the Hell's Angel. Has she harmed herself after all? Please God, not that. The questions tumble around in my head, and my heart is racing as I say with the dread of past experience, she's my daughter, what about her? Holding my breath, I brace for bad news, but whatever I'm expecting to hear, there's nothing that can prepare me for what this stranger has to say. He says it baldly and without preamble or warning. The caller is Investigator Joe Holmes of the Orange County, California Sheriff's Department. He is the one who ignites the match and drops the bomb that changes my life forever. I'm sorry to tell you, your daughter has been murdered. Sorry about the phone. So this is Jennifer and Tom, the man who killed her and himself. He was a federal agent who worked for the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is now Homeland Security. That's the poem. In the book, there are several excerpts from transcripts that I have of completely amazing mediumship readings. A few of the readings I had, because I'm a psychic junkie and I get a lot of readings. And I hope that the information in those readings that were so spot on will shake up some of the skeptics who read the book, who maybe, didn't believe in that sort of thing. When I started writing the book, I asked my daughter, Jennifer, to give me a sign that I was finally doing what Spirit wanted from me and that the book was okay, that it was what they wanted. And for once, I asked for a specific sign. Normally, I would just say, give me a sign. And how then could I be sure whether the sign was right or not? But this time, I said, please give me a sign that has to do with mermaids, because I associate mermaids with Jennifer. She loved that movie, The Little Mermaid. I have the little mermaid doll that she had in her apartment. There's a big poster in my living room of a mermaid that she had in her apartment, and a bunch of little figurines. So mermaids were a big thing with her. So I was going to sleep, and that night I asked her for a sign with a mermaid. The very next morning, something happened. My daughter-in-law, whose name is Tuba, she's a beautiful young woman, a Turkish-German woman, and she and my son and my 3.5-year-old granddaughter live in Germany. So Tuba sends me thousands of pictures of my granddaughter, but she never, ever texts me. So I got up the next morning after asking for this sign, and I looked on my phone, and there was a WhatsApp message from Tuba. She wrote, "The dresses arrived yesterday, and a few days ago, the mermaid puzzle arrived as well." I had, this was in February. So back in December, I had sent some Christmas presents to my granddaughter. And one of them, I sent these separately. One of them was these dresses for her doll, and there was a mermaid outfit in them. And the other was a puzzle of the Little Mermaid. So I was very excited because, like I said, I never hear from Tuba, but now, and she said that a few days ago, the mermaid puzzle arrived. So that was before I had even asked for this sign. That night, I sent a WhatsApp text to my son, Ben, and I told him what had happened. And he said, well, that's very interesting because 15 minutes ago, we were talking to Cleo. Remember, she's three and a half. And they needed to come up with a special word for her for a purpose that I can't talk about. But they needed a word, and they asked her what word she chose, and she chose the word mermaid. So that was exciting too. I was, really buzzing with all these things. But that's not all. And this story is in the book. A couple of nights later, I had been invited to speak at the Hillside Book Club near me about my book, The Last Door, the one that I spoke about the last time I was with this group. It had just come out. I had spoken at the Hillside Book Club twice before, but a long time ago. In 2017 was the last time I had a book that came out called What She Saw, which became the prequel for the Beyond the Veil series. And their book club meeting fell on Halloween that year in 2017. And everybody who came to the party dressed up as characters from my book, which was really fun and exciting. The hostess, Irene, came dressed as a mermaid. And the reason, I don't know why she chose that, but I used the Little Mermaid doll that I had from a plastic figurine that I had from my daughter's house, and I put it into a scene in the story. So she came dressed as the mermaid. So I hadn't seen any of these people in 5 years. So I'm at Amy's house, Amy was the hostess this year, and we're talking, and Irene came in, and she came over to me and said, hi, I was the mermaid. And I said, yes, I remember. And I didn't say anything else about it right then. So I gave my talk, and we chatted, and we're having a good time, and things were winding down. And I said, Irene, I bet when you said to me I was the mermaid that you didn't know you were going to be part of a sign sent to me by my daughter. And I told them about these other things with Cleo. And Amy, the host, got very excited and showed me her stemless wine glass, which her neighbor had painted for her. And I bet you can't see it. Sorry. But it says on it here, Mermazing Sisters. And there's a picture that she painted of a mermaid. So ask for very specific signs and you will get them. And I probably will keep asking for mermaids. I don't know. So in the book, I ended up writing not only about my evolving relationship with Jennifer, because we had a very difficult relationship. And a couple of years before she was killed, she called me one day and said, I don't hate you anymore, which to me meant that was her way of saying, I love you. So it took a long time and a lot to go through. But I had to write about that relationship. But as I was writing, I found I had to write a lot of my own background. And not only that, but my parents too, and my grandparents, because those relationships colored who I became and who Jennifer became. I was very surprised too at how much I ended up writing about the religion that messed up my life so very much. And I decided to put in pictures. There are like 20 pages of pictures, and it was hard to pick the ones most relevant, but I thought my parents, as they met in show business, would be fun. They were in English pantomime, and my dad was in a show called This Was the Army. It was an all-male review, and in the US, you'd call it vaudeville. And then there's me when I was young and skinny. But I also, and some of you have seen these pictures, this is Jennifer when she was on the earth, and two of the pictures that Sonia Rinaldi, or images, I should say, that Sonia Rinaldi got for me of Jennifer in spirit now. So I always love those. I mean, it's very clear. You look at the eyebrows and you can see, and the lips, you can see that it's the same person, but it's not the same picture. And I included pictures similar to this, images of my second husband, who is in spirit now, and a man that I was seeing who passed very suddenly. And I put their pictures in there too. So I was very, very blessed with the cover, and I know this had to be spirit as well, because an award-winning cover designer and graphic artist did my cover and refused payment for it. So I have this beautiful cover, and the book is getting good reviews. Oh, I also want to tell you, in case anybody's interested, the book Proof of Life, which is in the Beyond the Veil series, is currently free to download from Amazon or any of the Kobo or Barnes & Noble or Apple Books or any of those. It's free until Tuesday night. So you're welcome to download that. That's the beginning of the story of the reluctant medium who is called on to use her gift to help locate a missing child. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I invite any comments or questions about anything.